Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. It looks like the president is having some success at NATO. He said, look, guys, you've pledged 2% of your GDP for defense. How about doing it? You're not going to get a free ride on America anymore. We're not going to carry the full load of NATO. We're trying to defend you, Germany and France and other countries in NATO. And if you want us to do it, you've got to do your fair share. Now, if all those NATO countries begin to pitch in, it will be an enormous pool of money. As I think we said yesterday, we have seen reports that the German troops are actually drilling with wooden rifles. They can't afford rifles. Their submarines don't work. Their tanks don't roll and so forth. But now they're going to have to put up some money. They've got plenty of money. They just need to put it into defense. And America is spending something like $680 billion a year in defense spending. I mean, we're way ahead of everybody else in the world. And I think we all might question the fact it's nice to have all the latest gadgets, but I think the time has come we begin to scale back some of these extravagant purchases we're making. And I know the defense contractors won't like that, but the truth is we've got to, get this under control. But nevertheless, if NATO comes through, Putin will be contained, and that's what NATO is all about. Well, going to the Middle East, right now, Iranian forces are threatening Israel across the border with Syria, with one general going as far as to say he's just waiting for the order to attack Israel. It's a crisis that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is taking directly to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Well, this isn't the first time Netanyahu has traveled to Moscow to talk about Syria, given Putin's influence and involvement there. Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell shows us why Israel has good reason to worry about its border challenges.
Following the meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Russian President Putin, Israeli reports said Russia was working to remove Iranian forces from Israel's border with Syria. It's the subject the Israeli leader came to discuss.
It's not new for you that our focus is on Syria and Iran.
Netanyahu has been working very hard to try to keep open lines of communication. Why? Because Russian military forces are operating just over the northern mountains of Israel in Syria. And Israel doesn't have a military conflict with Russia, and it does not want a military conflict with Russia.
Israel has its red lines inside Syria.
Israel cannot allow Iranian presence in Syria. Of course, we will in no way allow the Iranian bases or Hezbollah bases on the Israeli border. That's why the dialogue with the Russians is very important. And I really hope that also during these talks between Trump and Putin, these subjects will be addressed and will be solved.
The border continues to present a challenge to Israel. On Wednesday, Israel shot down a drone that violated its airspace. The IDF retaliated by hitting 3 targets inside Syria. And a top Iranian general has threatened Israel's destruction from just across the border. Today, an international Islamic army has been formed in Syria, and the voices of the Muslims are heard near the Golan. Orders are awaiting so that the custom of God vis-a-vis the eradication of the evil regime will land, and the life of this regime will be ended for good. The life of the Zionist regime was never in danger as it is now. In the meantime, the Syrian army, aided by Russian air support, is seizing strategic territory from rebel forces in southern Syria. A top Israeli intelligence group reports Iranian troops are also in the fight, often wearing Syrian uniforms to disguise themselves. All these boots on the ground threaten Israel's northern border. A key reason Prime Minister Netanyahu will insist Iran must leave Syria, either on its own or with help from the IDF. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
It's a major threat. Iran has been threatening Israel's destruction all for decades. And the time has come that Israel has got to stand up against them. But a war, Russia would consider Iran their proxy. And if we look at the Bible, that's what's going to happen, an invasion of Israel by a coalition that includes Iran and the Islamic republics that border the southern part of Russia, and Turkey. So it's all in there. It's in the Bible, and it's getting, you see the news, it's all shaping up. It's going to happen. Well, President Trump is heading to Britain after wrapping up a contentious NATO meeting in Brussels. Ephraim Graham has more of our top stories from CBN Newsroom. Here's Ephraim.
Pat, after delivering a stern lecture to NATO members, President Trump announced they've agreed to increase spending on defense, but not all NATO leaders agree that's what happened. Our Gary Lane is on this story.
After scolding NATO on Wednesday, President Trump praised the alliance on Thursday. Members agreed to increase their defense spending by at least $33 billion.
NATO is much stronger now than it was 2 days ago. I can tell you that NATO now is really a fine-tuned machine. People are paying money that they never paid before. They're happy to do it. And the United States is being treated much more fairly.
What prompted the NATO decision? The president took on members of the 69-year-old NATO alliance by questioning Germany's relationship with Russia.
Germany, as far as I'm concerned, is captive to Russia. So we're supposed to protect Germany, but they're getting their energy from Russia. Explain that.
A $12 billion Gazprom pipeline doubles the amount of natural gas flowing from Russia into Western Europe. The United States says it makes NATO more dependent on Russia for energy. That means increased Russian political influence and leverage on an alliance that America spends billions of dollars to help defend against Russia.
Because we understand that when we stand together also when dealing with Russia, we are stronger.
But Trump says most NATO members aren't spending their fair share. Only 6 of 29 members are spending barely 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. The United States spends 3.6%. The president wants to see each NATO member spend 4%. The United Kingdom is next on President Trump's itinerary. Anti-Trump protesters are expected to be out in full force, some voicing their displeasure with the American president by displaying this baby balloon. One of the highlights of the president's England visit will be a meeting with the Queen at Windsor Castle. Gary Lane, CBN News.
French President Emmanuel Macron denied President Trump's claim NATO allies have agreed to boost their defense spending beyond 2% of their gross domestic product. Macron said the summit's communique, quote, confirms the goal is 2% by 2024, and that is all. The FBI agent whose anti-Trump text messages fueled suspicions of bias against Donald Trump during the 2016 election testifies before Congress today. The Inspector General's report revealed Peter Strzok texted, quote, "We will stop it," in reference to Trump's campaign. Strzok also led the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email scandal and worked on the investigation into the Trump campaign's connections to Russia. Now some members of Congress want answers on why the Russia investigation was started in the first place. Strzok has said he has never allowed personal opinions to affect his work. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh continues his Capitol Hill visits today, working to win over senators before his confirmation hearings. Wednesday, Maine's Susan Collins signaled she's not opposed to Kavanaugh. Some feared the moderate Republican would vote against him because to protect Roe v. Wade. That's the ruling that legalized abortion, but Collins indicated Kavanaugh passes her litmus test on the issue.
Any judge who demonstrated hostility to Roe would not be a person that I could vote for. I've not seen that with Judge Kavanaugh.
Senator Collins said she discussed Roe v. Wade and other cases in her one-on-one meeting with Kavanaugh. Democrats fighting Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination say abortion rights are at stake. But what would happen if the case legalizing abortion is overturned? And what would make the court reconsider it? Jennifer Wishon has some answers.
If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, then legal control over abortion is returned to the states, setting up a new patchwork of laws. In 4 states, North and South Dakota, Mississippi, and Louisiana, abortion would be automatically banned. 9 additional states which had abortion bans before Roe would likely become law again. And in 8 states, abortion would remain legal. If this control returns to the states, it would coincide with a growing number of Americans identifying as pro-life. Plus, Republicans currently hold more seats in state legislatures across the country. So if the last decade is any indication, new pro-life laws could be on the way.
We've seen an average of nearly 60 pro-life laws passed every single year and signed into law since 2011.
A number of those state laws already face court challenges, which would likely become the mechanism that puts abortion back on the Supreme Court docket.
When a case comes up based on one of these state-level laws, then the court would be able to re-examine the issue of abortion in America and would be able to say, in fact, there is no such right. In fact, Roe was poorly reasoned.
Catherine Glenn Foster says due to that reasoning, she feels confident Roe will be overturned. It's just a matter of when.
We expect that the next justice will rely upon the Constitution, its original meaning, the original intent of the founders, the text of the document itself, when making these very weighty decisions, life-altering decisions.
So even if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the legal fight over abortion will continue. At the Supreme Court, Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Pat, your thoughts here?
Well, you know, when that Roe decision came down a long time ago, I felt that it was wrong. The reason it was wrong is because they federalized a personal moral decision that human beings make. And if there is a change in the attitude of the country about that, it should be settled in a democratic process by the voters at the ballot box, not by 5 unelected judges in the Supreme Court pushed on by the ACLU. But that thing has caused rancor and bitterness across our nation because people who are pro-life feel so frustrated because they can't get through. Even if they put stuff through the state legislatures, it's ruled unconstitutional because of a federal decision. It should never have been federalized. That's the same thing with this thing about marriage. Overwhelmingly, the states had voted to retain marriage as a union between a man and a woman. And now all of a sudden the Supreme Court comes out and talks about human dignity and human personality and all that stuff. But you've got going all the way back to Griswold versus Connecticut. That was the foundation of Roe versus Wade, and that's one where Justice Douglas, who used to teach law at Yale, I think he was a Yale graduate, and he comes up with this business about all these penumbras and emanations, and who in the world heard about a penumbra and an emanation? Well, we found a penumbra and an emanation in the 14th Amendment, and therefore there was a right to privacy that's implicit in the law. Well, there ain't no penumbras and there ain't no emanations. The whole thing was made up by a judge who was a Yale graduate who wanted Mr. Griswold to get condoms in New Haven. That's what it was all about. And that was the foundation of Roe versus Wade. The whole thing is nonsense. But we've been stuck with it, and there's this hideous hatred and animosity that's been generated because of the frustration that comes about on the issues. If it was in the states and the states voted on it and the people voted and they were content, all right, well, the legislature's spoken and the people have spoken and we've had a referendum and the majority of the people voted for it, then everybody would be quiet. They say, okay, well, that's what the people wanted. But this has been imposed upon them by the Supreme Court. So it's really been bad. And maybe it'll be settled. There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today about what would a Kavanaugh court be. But indeed, this whole thing has got to be settled. And the biggest thing is judicial restraint. Get the judges out of politics and let them go back to interpreting the law, which is what they were supposed to do, not make law. Ephraim.
Pat, the United States is on pace to pass both Saudi Arabia and Russia as the world's biggest oil producer. The latest data released by the Energy Department shows U.S. oil output growing next year to 11.8 million barrels a day. Energy officials say that would make the U.S. the world's #1 producer. They say production is booming in shale fields because of newer techniques such as fracking and horizontal drilling. Everyone is strong in mind and heart. That is the word from the doctor in Thailand treating the boys and their soccer coach rescued from deep within that flooded cave. The 12 boys made two-finger victory signs from their hospital beds. They are in an isolation ward recovering from their 18-day ordeal. Their parents watch with relief from behind a glass wall. 3 are being treated for lung infections, but overall, doctors say they're all doing well. They'll spend 7 days in the hospital and then go home to continue resting. A Thai official who oversaw the rescue mission calls it, quote, a symbol of unity among mankind. Can't get enough of that story. Pat?
Well, we're just grateful for those boys. The whole world is interested in amazing. There are millions of people who die. They're victims of trafficking. They're caught up in disease. They're caught into war and famine. But here you've got a few young boys who are trapped in a cave, and all the world is pulling for them, praying for their release, and here they are all out, and hopefully they're healthy. So we rejoice in that. That's a victory for mankind, I guess we say.